Will this grammar allow you to go through and complete beginning Greek in 5 weeks? Well, that's what we're here to find out. Let's get into it. Hey there, I'm Darryl Burling from Master New Testament Greek, here to help you with the tools, habits and system to master the Greek of the New Testament. If you're interested in learning biblical Greek and maybe you've just sort of want to find out, can you do it? Is it possible to do it in 5 weeks? Well, then this video is for you. As you know, and if you've been watching this channel for a little while, I review Greek grammars, which seems like an incredibly nerdy thing to do, but I have good reasons for it. And I know from the interaction I have with many of you that some of you find this really helpful. So we've been through a number of grammars. We looked at Mounts, we looked at Merkel and Plummer, we've looked at a whole variety of different grammars that are on the market today. We've evaluated them, and I've even given you a top 10 of my grammars that I've reviewed so far and pretty much where they fit. And if you're interested in that, you can find a link to it in the video description or the just up here in that link that I've left up there. So if you're interested in that, go find out more about it. But this week, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the New Testament Greek Primer by S.M. Baugh. Now, Baugh is a really, I have a lot of admiration for Dr. Baugh, for his scholarly work that he's done in a whole variety of New Testament oriented fields. And I've been really looking forward to reviewing this grammar for some time. It's been sitting here on my shelf for a little while, waiting for me to get to it. And I finally pulled it off the shelf a little bit ago and just said, you know what, I really got to get this one done. So that's what we're going to do today. Now, one of the things that I've found is that over the time I've been reviewing Greek grammars is often, from my point of view as a reviewer, one of the most important things to look at in the grammar is the introduction, is the author's preface, to see what do they think should be done and how do they want this to be used. And it's really interesting to see the different ideological approaches and philosophical reasonings behind different layouts and approaches and so on and so forth. Now, when I went through and looked in the introduction for this grammar, I found that what Dr. Baugh has done is he's designed this grammar to be as like a crash course, if you like, a 5-week intensive course to learn biblical Greek in. And I think every grammar and grammarian is trying to do something specific with their grammar, and certainly this is no exception. Like I said, the idea here is to be able to review the entire syllabus, if you like, of beginning Greek in 5 weeks. And accordingly, this grammar is laid out in 30 chapters. Now, if you break that down into 5 weeks, essentially you're going to be doing 6 chapters a week, okay? Now, that might seem awkward. It kind of doesn't really work if you're going to do, one a day. That's 6 per week kind of thing. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, if you wanted to do it that way. But I think the way this is intended to be used is really 2 lessons on 3 days every week. So maybe Monday morning, Monday, just after lunch, you might do a lesson each of those times. Same with Wednesday and same with Thursday. So 2 on Monday, 2 on Wednesday, and then 2 on Friday. And that would get you through, 30 chapters in about 5 weeks. One thing you don't have to wait 5 weeks for is to hit the like button below. You can do that instantly. And it's one of those nice ways you get instant gratification in the world of learning Greek. So go ahead, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, the notify bell if you haven't already done so. And let's see about learning this in 5 weeks instead. I think at the end of the day, this has then some pretty specific target audience requirements. First of all, you're likely to be using this in a seminary. This is not really designed for self-study use. And I think as we go through the content of this, you kind of agree with me. Maybe you won't if you don't have a copy and you can't look at all the details, but I'll try and show you some of the details as we go through. So that's one thing. The other thing I think is because it's such an intensive course, I think this is really designed for somebody who can devote full-time or near full-time attention to learning Greek for 5 weeks. Now, if you can do that, go to it. This would probably be helpful in that. But I still have some reservations about that. Even if you are using this as, and you're studying Greek full time, there's still some challenges with using this grammar that I'll talk about in just a moment. So that means then that as a target audience, I think this is really ideal for a pre-semester seminary training course. So a lot of seminaries, like for instance the seminary I went to, the Master's Seminary, they don't teach beginning Greek in seminary, in the Master's level program. They require you to already have Greek before you start. Now, a lot of people, when they come into a program like that, don't already have Greek. And so these seminaries, what they will do, and it sounds like Westminster in California is similar, they will actually provide a short heavy duty, kind of intensive course during the summer semester, summer break, that you can then go through that will prepare you for introductory Greek. And I had a number of friends who have been through courses like this, and I can tell you from my personal experience that these intensive courses are significantly more difficult than learning Greek. I mean, learning Greek is hard enough on its own. To learn Greek in one of these kind of scenarios is even more intense and more difficult. But you can certainly understand why you'd want to do it, right? Because who wants to spend all summer working through beginning Greek when the summer is normally a time when you're not studying anyway? So why not just spend 5 weeks intensively working through it, at least try and get the basics down, and then you can sort of fine tune it as you get into the exegetical classes and some of the more advanced stuff that you will do during the semester in the seminary. That's what I think this grammar is designed for. This grammar is really designed around that exact scenario. You're going to be in seminary, you haven't learned beginning Greek, you haven't been through beginning Greek yet. Let's do this over 5 weeks so that you can get through it and get into it on your own. Now, the other thing about this then that I think is pretty specific is that if you're going to do it in this environment, that means then that there are certain things that you do and do not require of your beginning Greek grammar that you can then start to make compromises on, or at least, make decisions about in terms of where you want to take students. So as I work through the material in this grammar, I kind of get the impression that the material in this book itself is probably not going to be sufficient for the student. That means then that if you are thinking of teaching Greek, you're going to want to be prepared beforehand to lecture through the material that's in this grammar before you get to course. It's not going to be enough to walk through the material in this grammar on its own with students. There's a number of things that really need a lot more explanation than they really get. For instance, there's very little in this grammar that even talks about verbal aspect. In fact, there's nothing in this grammar that talks about aspect. There's not even anything really that talks about how tense works at all with regards to Greek verbs. The closest you get is in the chapter, I think it's chapter 5, where we talk about the imperfect tense form, where we have the discussion about the augment. The augment then, according to Baugh and the writing in this book generally refers to past time. So the implication then is that certain verbs with the augment are used to represent elements, things that took place in the past. And often that is the case. That just leaves the student to assume that really tense in the Greek works the same way as it does in English, since most students, when they come to beginning Greek, at least ones written in English, are coming at it from an English first point of view. That means all their assumptions about the English language that they already know are going to just sort of be dropped into the knowledge of Greek as well. So they're going to come at Greek as if it's a tense-oriented language. And like I mentioned, there is absolutely nothing in this grammar at all that even discusses aspect. The word aspect, I don't even think occurs in this book as far as I could tell anyway. So there's not even the nuance that Greek is an aspect prominent language, which most, if not all, grammarians today would agree that it is. So then, when it comes to this grammar, you're going to need some further explanations of things. And I think not just with that, even some of the discussions around morphology. There's elements in the morphological discussion that really, I think, could be further explained, broken down a little bit more, made a little bit more pictorial, so that a student coming at this for the first time is not going to be wondering how do these things fit together. There's an explanation for sure, but I don't think it's going to be sufficient. And so I think then, for this reason, this grammar is ideally designed for a classroom where you have an experienced teacher who can lecture through the basic concepts of each chapter, and then the students have really roughly a set of notes that they can go home with, along with some exercises and some translation that they can do to learn the concepts they've learned in that class. And then, of course, if you're learning 2 chapters in a day, maybe in the morning and afternoon on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, then that would give you a day in between to kind of try and work out some of those details. So I think that this is probably ideally suited for a classroom environment. For that reason, I think the professor then would need to provide additional explanation and examples to help the student understand what they're dealing with in each chapter. So that's a little bit about the target audience, and I think the use case that this grammar is designed around. let's talk about some of the specifics. And there are a number of really good things in this grammar that I do really like. This is one of the better grammars that I've seen in terms of giving students a guide for what they need to do on a day-by-day basis to actually learn the material. This has got some very helpful and very practical tips in the first chapter, in the introduction to learning languages, that I think every student of Greek should learn and read. In fact, if I could take one thing and say every Greek student should read this one piece of this grammar, it would be the author's introduction. There he says there are really two extremes when it comes to learning the language. One is the sort of the blasé kind of nature of those who would look at a survey class, like an Old Testament survey or a New Testament survey class, who just think they're going to pick it up by osmosis as they go through. And those people are going to be sadly surprised. And he mentions in 5 years you might maybe still remember the alphabet. The other group is those who go through a grammar like this and in 5 weeks expect to be reading, say, James with a degree of fluency. Those people likewise will also be disappointed. And he's arguing in here that really, like what I argue, is that Greek is really a lifelong pursuit. And I think lots of people say this and agree with me on this, but that like Greek is really a long-term pursuit that you are continually honing and improving and skilling yourself up on so that your skill set becomes greater and greater as time goes on. It's not one of those things that is short-term. You can't just learn it like a survey class or something. It is one of those things that takes a little bit more time. So he has a good explanation of that. He also has a great explanation, just like I mentioned, of very practical tools and tips, including things like how to learn vocabulary, things like grouping different words together so that the lexical meaning of one word spills over and helps you to remember the lexical meaning of another word. Another thing I really like about this grammar is the exercises. There's a variety of different exercises in this grammar, and that is to say that you've got a number of matching type exercises in here, like find the difference between the imperfect and the present tense verb in the chapter on the imperfect by identifying them, so circle which one it is, and things like that. A little bit like what you get with Dr. Merkel and Dr. Plummer's grammar beginning with New Testament Greek, which shouldn't really be a surprise given that Dr. Merkel and Dr. Plummer actually learned Greek under Dr. Baugh a number of years ago. So there's a lot of structure in this grammar that actually is the same as Dr. Baugh's grammar, and it allows you to see the connection between the two. So very interesting. The other thing about this is that it has about 10 exercises to translate each week, or each lesson rather. Now, on the surface of it, that seems like it's not very much, and maybe you'd be inclined to add some more to that. But I think if you're going to do this in 5 weeks, if you think about it, that means that every day you're getting 20 passages of Greek to translate, in addition to all the other exercises that you have as well, which means that really 20, 40, 60 translation exercises a week is actually quite a few. So I think given the purpose and structure of this, 10 per lesson is actually sufficient. If you're going to use this over a longer term though, perhaps over a semester where you're doing like 2 chapters a week, then I would encourage you to perhaps add to that and do a few more exercises. Maybe augment it from something like another grammar, which has a very similar structure. Speaking of similar structures, just like beginning with New Testament Greek, or rather beginning with New Testament Greek, just like this, breaks the nouns into first declension and then second declension. That means you're going to learn all of the different cases in the chapter on the first declension, and you're going to reuse those in the second declension. Most grammars, by contrast, today will teach you about the different cases. So Mounts, for instance, chapter 6 of Mounts' Basics of Biblical Greek, you're going to look at the nominative and the accusative. Chapter 7, you're going to look at the genitive and the dative. And I think that I would probably prefer to go with the per chapter breakdown because there's a lot to learn around the cases, and I think that the declensions are easier to get than the cases. But nonetheless, maybe I'm wrong on that. It's worked pretty well with beginning with New Testament Greek in my experience, so I'm not going to be too harsh on that one. A couple other little things about this grammar as we sort of near the end of this review. This is the 3rd edition, as you can see here. The 2nd edition was published in 2009. The 3rd edition here, 2012, is still a product of its time, right? 2012 was like, a millennium ago in terms of what's been happening in the world of New Testament Greek, and particularly around some of the key issues that we teach. So, for instance, dependency. This grammar still teaches dependency, and like I mentioned, it's very tense oriented. It doesn't teach tense, but it doesn't teach aspect, which means that there's really no discussion around verbal aspect in this whatsoever. In fact, even just a discussion of, you know, completed versus incomplete in the present verse. Yeah, the present tense does talk about a normally ongoing kind of event, but it doesn't really say very much about how to take the arrow. So you kind of left, the students left largely to themselves to figure it out, or more likely, they're going to depend on the in-class lectures that they're going to get to help them work those sorts of things out. A couple other things, this has got the answers in the back of it. So in addition to having the workbook built in, there is an answer key in the back as well. So if you do use this for self-study, or if you're going through it for a class, you can actually check your work as you go, which is good. Don't cheat, of course, never cheat. Make sure you know the material, go over it repeatedly until you know it, and then check your work afterwards. It's also got a glossary in the back here, so you've got the words that are taught in the grammar. In addition to those words, it's also going to teach you, like in the glossary, it's also going to tell you what chapter that word was included in. So it's pretty easy to sort of track where you learned a particular word, go back to it, see the gloss there. Most of the time, the words that are being introduced in a chapter are related to that chapter. So for instance, if you go through and look at the chapter on, say, second aorists, it's going to teach you second aorist verbs so that you can start to see how the verbs, the second aorist verbs work and why they got how they got a different root and so on and so forth. It's also got a glossary in the back and an index, and it's got a whole bunch of paradigms in the back as well. So it's got plenty of reference material in it. And in fact, the number of pages itself is actually pretty light. So it's about 164 pages of teaching material, and then everything from that point is actually just reference material. So it's pretty short. The chapters in this are pretty short, which makes them pretty digestible. But like I mentioned, it's not really suitable if you're going to be studying on your own. If you're going to be studying on your own, you'll probably be better off, in my opinion, with beginning with New Testament Greek, which I think is a more comprehensive grammar. It's got just as many exercises, if not more. You've got more online resources for it. So this would be my go-to grammar if you're going to be studying on your own. However, if you're going to be going through a 5-week intensive course, or you're a teacher looking at going through a 5-week intensive course, and you're happy to do some teaching, lecturing through the material, then consider this. This has been set up specifically for that. The exercises are designed around it, and it could be a really helpful way of getting into beginning Greek in a short amount of time. I personally, if I was going to teach Greek in 5 weeks, I probably still wouldn't use this, mostly because particularly for me in an online environment, I would be wanting to have my students have at least a good understanding of the material when they're not in front of me. So that means I want them to have a better explanation, which something like Beginning with New Testament Greek or Rodney Decker's Reading Koine Greek are more likely to provide. So I would probably use that rather than this, even in a 5-week environment. It would take a little bit of messing around to get the balance of content right, the number of chapters and so on, but nonetheless, that would be how I would probably look at working it. But what about you? Have you learnt Greek using this grammar? If so, leave a comment in the comment section below and let me know how the classroom worked and how you used the grammar and how you found it. I'd love to hear from you there as well. And if you haven't been through Beginning Greek yet and you'd be interested in doing so, then don't forget to download my free roadmap to mastery. I've just updated it. It's far nicer now to look at and read. So if you're interested in looking at that, go to masterntgreek.com/roadmap and download your free copy today. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know again in the comment section below what you thought of this grammar if you've been through it. I look forward to seeing you down there in the comments. And I'll tell you what, one last thing. If you have a grammar you'd like me to review that I haven't yet reviewed, leave a comment in the comment section below. I'm looking for a few more to add to the list, so let me know and I'll look at doing some of those in the near future. Thanks again. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. We'll see you then.